is just an empty, meaningless life of comfort and pleasure.
Right. You know, it strikes me that can sometimes easily happen in our culture. You mentioned Kim Kardashian, but it's not just Kim Kardashian. There's so many people that will have the trappings of, we'll say, Christianity, right? They may wear a cross necklace or have the Bible verse on their wall, but as you look into their life, you see nothing else that resembles Christianity except the trappings or the shell of what it is.
How is she different from someone who says, I'm going to work 60 hours a week until I get enough money that I can go retire to a beach and play golf every day?
Right.
It's still this life that, you know, you wonder what's the purpose of it.
Right.
And there's nothing overtly Christian about it. And there's nothing overtly religious about her at all. In fact, whatever religion she has, she keeps it hidden from sight.
Why is God never mentioned in the book of Esther?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for you. It seems as if it's almost on purpose that God is not mentioned. And there's even a point where Esther tells Mordecai, tell the Jews to fast, to put on sackcloth and ashes and fast 2 or 3 days for me before I go see the king. And in that, there's no mention of prayer or God. And so it's almost as if the writer on purpose has had to strive to leave God out of the book. And it is a very curious thing. For this reason, there have been people in the past that wonder if it really belonged in the Bible. It's that odd. It's this secular book, seeming secular book, right in the middle of all of these holy books that just have God on every page.
Right.
But if you think that God's not on every page of Esther, you've not been paying attention.
Maybe it's one of those things where, you never realize how much you desperately need something or look for something or rely on something until you see its absence. You know, maybe this is one of those. Maybe this is why the book of Esther is there, so that we can contrast the presence of God in every other book, and then here we see this absence of God, so it draws our attention to even ask these questions and think about God.
Well, it's an absence of him being overtly mentioned.
Right.
But you see his hand on every page.
That's true.
And he's hinted at. Mordecai says to Esther, who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I mean, it's like
Providence of God, ding, ding, ding.
Yes, and there's so much of that. I mean, it is obviously God working providentially to save his people from their enemies, even when his people are unfaithful to him.
Right. Okay. What does the Christian take away from the book of Esther?
Well, there really are no good characters in the book. I mean, the king is horrible. Haman is horrible. Esther is unfaithful until she finds herself in a place to be brave. And Mordecai seems to have upstanding character. I mean,
well, even in that moment for Esther, we don't know that it's necessarily out of her faithfulness to God, just that she doesn't want her people killed, right?
Yes. And so we applaud her bravery. It's a good character trait. Mordecai is loyal to the king, which we see as a good character trait. But the Christian takes away from the book of Esther, again, that God is always faithful to his people, even when they're unfaithful to him. How many people have you known who were religious, who were Christian in their upbringing, and then went astray from God, and all their lives, living their lives as if God doesn't even exist, and then they're brought back, at the end of their life. And at the end of their life, they're brought back to God by God's grace, and they say, even when I wasn't aware of it, God was looking out for me to bring me back to this place.
Right.
And so we see some of that in the book of Esther. God is still faithful to us even when we're unfaithful to him.
Okay.
And God even takes the wrong decisions that we make sometimes. We can never excuse wrong decisions. We can never excuse unwise decisions. We can never excuse sinful decisions. But nevertheless, God's providence is seen to be working even in those things that we do wrong.
God's goodness is always better than our bad decisions.
Yes, Esther should never have been the queen. But there she was, and then God used her to save the people from the wicked plot of Haman.
And God's faithfulness is always bigger than our forgetfulness of God.
Don't say then that, well, it's okay then. It's okay for me if you take it as a license to just do whatever you want. That's taking God for granted.
Well, I think we miss the full. If we do that, we miss the fullness of what we have in God. I mean, the question is not, is God faithful to Esther, because he is faithful to Esther. The question is, what more could have Esther had in her relationship with God if she'd sought him?
Right. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so where do we see? Because we believe any book that's in the Bible, if it is biblical, if it is scriptural, it points us toward Jesus. And it's tough in this one, but but we've got to answer this question: where do we find Jesus in the book of Esther?
Okay, think about it. We see Jesus in the person of Esther, whose name means star, and Jesus is the bright and morning star. Jesus is the it was a star that led the wise men to Jesus. Esther is the mediator between God's people and the king. And Esther, when she goes to plead for the people, the king holds out the scepter to her. In the same way, Jesus is the mediator between us, God's people, and the King of the universe. And when he goes to the Father hands him the scepter. So in that we see Jesus. We see Jesus in Esther.
Okay.
And we also see his providential hand working in the lives of the people.
Okay. All right. Very good. Anything else that you want the folks to know about the book of Esther?
Well, I hope you read it. There's.
It is an easy read.
Yes,
it's 9 chapters, but it's got a lot going on.
Right. Right. It is an easy read.
It'd make a good movie.
Think about how God is always working in the world, even among those who are really not acknowledging him. God is ever present. And it may be that on purpose he's not mentioned so that we'll learn to see him in situations where he's not overtly there. God is always there whether we acknowledge it or not.
Good point. Good point. Well, I think that's a good way to end it. So let me close us with a word of prayer.
Okay.
Gracious God, we give you thanks for the book of Esther, and even though it's sometimes difficult to see you when you're not overtly mentioned, give us eyes to look for you. Give us hearts that search out for you in the book of Esther and in our lives. Help us to see Jesus in every corner of our being. We ask this in his name. Amen.